All right, so uh, round three. This hand is not exactly what we're looking for. So remember the sort of rule of thumb that I gave you before, where if you have a turn one Vial, you generally keep. If you have a turn two Arbiter or Thalia, you generally keep. And then if the rest of the hand is really good, but you don't have any of those three, but you have Serum Visions to try to find an Arbiter or a Thalia for turn two, then sometimes you can keep those hands. This hand is none of those things. It is nice that we have the Canopy. That's one of the ways to mitigate flood, which is what we're already doing, is flooding, because 5 lands is flood. If we draw an Arbiter, we have double Ghost Quarter, so that's great. But this hand is just going Selfless Spirit into Mirran Crusader. I mean, this Modern isn't standard. Like in Standard, you can keep these types of hands where you have 2-drop, 3-drop, because you're just playing these kind of a different game where like turn 2 creature, turn 3 creature is like a good start. In Modern, you have to be disrupting the opponent. You can't just play a 2-power flyer on turn 2 and then basically 4-power creature on turn 3 and just hope that that works. So we definitely mulligan this hand. And now this hand is better because it has one of those things that I said to look for. We have the turn 1 Ether Vial, and then we also have a pair of 3-drops. So now with the Scry, we're basically going to scry a land to the, like any land to the bottom, and we're basically scrying any sort of creature or Serum Visions to the top. If it's Path to Exile, we have to really think about it. It's Canopy, so we're just going to scry that to the bottom. We don't need that. In fact, oh no, this is Bant. Yeah, this is the Bant company deck, and that's their win condition is the Ballista. These Duskwatch Recruiter to set up. So at this point, I'm just going to jam the Crusader, and there's a reason for that. So this Queller, I'm basically not going to try to counter. Like, let's say they played Knight of the Reliquary turn 3. I guess that's probably their best thing that they could do on 3. I don't want to counter the Knight there. I'd rather just have the Crusader on the battlefield. What I want is to do a couple of things. One, I want to be able to Queller a Collected Company, which is what they're probably going to try to do the following turn. But also what I want to do is I want to get this pressure going with this Crusader. So we attack for 4. They have this Misty Rainforest in play that's going to get cracked, and so they're going to go down to at least 16. And now once they're at 16, then the Crusader attacks them down to 12, and then they can, if they don't play a Collected Company, which they're probably going to try it, then we're going to Queller them. But even if they don't try it and they just put a counter on the Ballista, then the following turn they have to put another counter on the Ballista to shoot the Crusader, or they'd be trading the Ballista for the Crusader. I want to force that um, uh, that action, where if they don't do that and they try to do something else, they can get blown out by the Queller. Then they're at the mercy of our draw step, because if we draw any other creature, any way to pressure them, any sort of removal spell like Path to Exile, it can just blow up that plan. But if we don't do that and we don't play the Crusader there, then we play the Crusader the next turn, and they're like, okay, great. Well, now instead of trying to company or do anything else, I'm just going to put a counter on the Ballista, untap, put a counter on the Ballista, shoot the Crusader twice. And they're still at a healthy life total. Like, they're not really forcing any action. So I figured I had to play that Crusader there. That was something I had, because that's not the turn I want a Queller. That's the turn I want a Crusader. So we go up to 3, and we drew another Crusader, which was a good draw. That was one of the ways I said, let the top of our deck complete this pressure. That's how you have to play these kinds of decks. Now, do you leave up for company? Nope, you play the Knight. Now we can counter the knight because we're about to Crusader too. So now we Crusader on their end step. Now we're threatening 10 points of damage and they're at 11. We do a Selfless Spirit, which is pretty strong. So now they're in a position where they basically have to chump block to stay alive. Because now they're like, if they just take it and go to 1, they can't tap their canopy for mana. So at this point, they basically have to chump block. And once you're chump blocking and taking 6 and going to 5, yeah, it's just not gonna go well for you. So anyway, the play that I was about to make before they conceded, we do not want to cast the Selfless Spirit pre-combat because if you think about it, there's no way they can kill any of our creature. It's not like they're going to giant growth or ballista or whatever. So they're either going to go to 1 life, which hooray, like now you're drawing dead because you can't even cast the canopy, or you are not going to go to 1 and you're going to chump block the Crusader, which is the plan that they're very likely to go on. So they chump block the Crusader, they take 6 and go to 5. They ping us down to 19. Then we play the Selfless Spirit post-combat, and the Selfless Spirit and the Crusader represent lethal, or even through the Knight. So like, let's say they have Path to Exile. They path the Queller to get their Knight back. Knight can't block Crusader because he's pro-green, and it can't block Spirit because he's flying, and that's lethal because they're at 5, and that's 6 power. So they'd have to path the Crusader. And if they path the Crusader, then we have 4 points of flying, which puts them down to 1, and that's 2 lethal flying attackers. But if we played the Spirit pre-combat, then they would chump block the Crusader like they have to do, then they'd sack it and kill the Spirit instead of pinging us. So we'd basically just be losing our Spirit by playing it pre-combat just to gain a life. And that's just a terrible play. But if you don't think through it before you, like, I know a lot of people in similar situations, they're just like, oh, great, I drew Selfless Spirit. Like, that'll procure even less things can go wrong in combat. Like, I don't know, they could Giant Growth or Ballista or something. I'm just going to cast the Selfless Spirit first. But it's like, no. Like, let's be realistic. Like, what are the cards that they're playing in Bant Company? They're not playing any spells that they can cast in this spot to get to help them in combat. So what's going to happen on board if you cast the Spirit pre-combat? Well, they're chumping with the Ballista, so they're just going to kill the Spirit. So just think about what's going to happen, and then it's pretty obvious that you're not supposed to play the Spirit pre-combat. So we were not going to. That's why we're going to attack first. All right, so game 2. So this is one of those hands I was talking about where you have, oh, by the way, in case you're interested in how I sideboarded, I boarded out 4 Thalia, and I boarded in the 3 Wraths and 1 Rest in Peace. I brought in the one Rest in Peace because they have Knight of the Reliquaries and they have Eternal Witness. Figure it was kind of like Thalia is pretty bad in this matchup because we're both just decks that are like all creatures. I mean, it slows down their company, so it's better against them than it is against us. But they have mana accelerating creatures, so they're going to basically get to that point in the game anyway. So Thalia is just our worst card. And I figure Wrath is really good. And that's the other thing, though, is when we go in the Wrath plan, Thalia actually hurts us. So a lot of times we end up having to chump block with our Thalia just so we can cast our Wrath. So basically, whenever we board in the Wraths, we're pretty much always going to board out the Thalias. And I wanted to board out all 4, and I guess the next best card in our sideboard was a Rest in Peace, which I think 1 Rest in Peace is fine, because it does turn off their Witnesses and their Knights. So anyway, yeah, this hand, it's there's no Arbiter, there's no Thalia, which of course we boarded those out, and there's no Vial. So this is the type of hand that I'd really consider mulliganing, but we also have the Serum Visions and the blue to cast it. So we can Serum Visions to try to find one of our 2-drops, like a Selfless Spirit or an Arbiter, and then cast it on 2, or even if we found a Vial, like that's fine. Turn 2 Vial isn't great, but it's something. And then turn 3, we can start playing Crusader and Spell Queller. So I mean, we could do better. I figured like it's one of those hands where it's kind of a 50-50. Like I wouldn't really fault you for keeping it or not keeping it, because like I was saying, if the hand is really great, then you can keep the Serum Visions can allow you to keep it. But that hand, I felt like on the draw, it was like not even, I don't know, maybe it was correct to keep that. I figured that was one of the closest hands. And we mulliganed, and now this hand is interesting. The other hand is like it's close, but like in a sort of non-interesting way. You know, it's like yeah, it's like 50-50. It's like it might be 51% correct to mulligan or 49% correct to mulligan it. And it's like yeah, like maybe you make the right decision or the wrong decision, but it's close enough where it doesn't really matter that much. Whereas this hand is interesting because it's like wow, things could go really well or really poorly because we have double Ghost Quarter Arbiter, which is like really good. But we have 2 colorless lands and like no other lands to cast our spells. So this one, and we're on the draw with a Scry. So it's pretty reasonably likely that we're going to find a white source for our, you know, in time. So then we'll get to play the Arbiter and start Ghost Quartering. But I figured this is not, you know, like even if we get there, now we're kind of light on lands. So now the Ghost Quarter, if we Ghost Quarter them, then it's like, well, okay, we're taking them off lands, but now we're mana screwing ourselves too. And they're a deck with the like Noble Hierarchs, Birds to Paradise type things. So I figured my chances are probably better mulliganing to 5, which we mulliganed to another interesting hand. So now with this hand, we have a turn 1 Vial and a turn 2 Vial if we can just find a land. So we scry, if it's a land, we keep it on top, and this hand is actually one of the hands that can win us the game from mull to 5. Or if it's so if it's a land, we scry to the top. If it's not a land, no matter what it is, we scry it to the bottom, obviously. So this hand, interestingly enough, I keep. So if we mulligan to 4, like what are we looking for? Like we're not going to win with a hand of like, you know, land, 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 you know, Mirror Crusader, or like land, land, Selfless Spirit, Mirror Crusader, or Queller, or whatever. I mean, like we might win with that hand, but like we need to draw more land and more action. So we need to just have a hand that has like what we're trying to do first, and the thing we want to do first is Vial. And with this hand, like if we can just peel a land, all we have to do is find a land, and this hand is like very capable of beating a 7-card hand. Because if we just go turn 1 Vial, turn 2 Vial, and miss our second land drop, we have a Path to Exile for like United the Reliquary or whatever you do. And these Vials are just going to tick up and regain all that tempo. And they're going to act as our mana sources. We're just going to have 1 on 2 and 1 on 3 and be casting all our spells. And eventually once we have a couple lands in play, we can put the Vial up to 4th, and we have 1 on 3, 1 on 4. We have 2 lands in place. We can cast our 2 drops, Vial in our 3 drops, and Vial in our Restoration Angel in our 4 drop. So this hand is actually a good mull to 5, even though it has no lands. So we scry the Geist to the bottom. And that's unfortunate. All right. That is also unfortunate. You know, put yourself in the best position to win, I guess. Kind of wishing we had that that first hand back, which was like the 50-50 hand. But I think our mulligan 5 hand is actually about as good as that 7-card hand. All we needed to do is find a land, and we just bricked. So I figured at that point I had to risk it. and Serum Visions into a land, so I can go land Vial and get this Vial online, because I'm not gonna win the game at this point with one land. And I bricked, which maybe maybe I wasn't in such a bad position as I thought I was. I just path there instead of Serum Visioning, because as it turns out, I think they kind of were on empty. So we take the damage. We have a line to survive. Which was so I Vial. Kind of unfortunate that we have 0 2-drops, so we couldn't find lands or 2-drops for a Vial. We just had like 3-drops and spells, and yeah, his hand was just awkward. But we double path to stay alive, or go to 2. They can't. Uh, okay, well now they just kill us with the Ballista. I was thinking, I'm like, well, we might actually mount a comeback if they don't have anything here. Like if they're just flooding, because then our Vial goes up to 3, so now we can queller like whatever thing they do, like collected company, any sort of big thing, and then we can violin um, the Mirror Crusader, and then we can like put the other vial into play and have that start ticking up, and you know, like our hand is like, you know, like if let's say they, instead of having the Ballista, if they just had, you know, 3 lands or like 2 lands and a mana dork, or like you know, another sort of not super relevant creature, we can start just like playing our blockers, and like, you know, we're actually, even though we missed a few land drops and got pretty far behind, like this game wasn't actually over if they didn't have that Ballista there. So yeah, this hand, a little awkward. So it kind of breaks all the rules, but we're on the draw, or I'm sorry, we're on the play. Like the Supreme Verdict is actually pretty good in this matchup. But I'm mulligan anyway, just because we're like, we don't even have the land, and it's awkward that it was double Ghost Quarter. So double Ghost Quarter and Verdict. If it was like any of the Wraths other than the Verdict, I think I keep. But Verdict is like white, white, blue, colorless. We had 2 colorless lands, so we were 2 lands away from Verdict anyway, unless we Ghost Quarter ourselves. So I just figured that was like, just too bad. It's 3 drops and Wrath. But also, an interesting synergy that we have in our deck is Selfless Spirit and the Wraths. So in these kind of matchups where I want the Wraths, but then we're oftentimes going to commit creatures to the board, especially when we're on the play, as we are, we can just set up a board where we sacrifice our Selfless Spirit and then Wrath, because all our creatures become indestructible. So then the Wrath is just one-sided. Then we attack with all our creatures into an empty board. So we mulliganed into a hand that's pretty good. Selfless Spirit. Yeah, that's fine. I'll top that. Actually, never mind. I bottomed it. Oh, we just need lands. Yeah. So we got our Vial going. They have their Knight, though, which is pretty good. So Coral Helm, this is lethal here, because that's their combo, Coral Helm and Knight of the Reliquary. So we let that resolve, and they just activate the Knight. If you haven't seen this combo, it's landfall. So whenever land enters the battlefield, you get to pick one, either scry 1 or untap target creature. So what they do is they sacrifice a land of the Knight of the Reliquary to get a fetch land, untaps the Knight, crack the fetch land to get a land, trigger the knight on the stack, sack the land, untap the knight, just keep like sacking the lands to untap the knight, to find lands, to sack lands, to untap the knight, and basically fill up their graveyard with lands, so knight's this huge knight. And they also get to add mana that way as well. So they get like lands and scry triggers and untapping. I guess the scry triggers aren't super relevant because they're searching, but basically they just get to sort of go infinite, and that's their combo. So awkwardly enough, since we don't have a violent 3, we have the double ghost quarter coast draw. We couldn't cast our queller. We couldn't violent the queller, so we had to ghost quarter ourselves just to get just a color fix, so we could cast our queller, because that was like they win the game if we don't counter this spell here. So that was a little awkward. Now they attack for 5, get on to 15. I think this ended up being a pretty good game though. So we activate, put this into play at our end step. Now we go up to 3, go up to 2, and we draw another Selfless Spirit. So now we're kind of racing, I think. And they Flector Mage, alright. Again, this is kind of the same scenario with the Unsubstantiate in the first match, where if you bounce a Spell Queller, then I can just, like, I can't cast it off the Reflector Mage, but I can still vial it back in. So that's what I do, because again, this is lethal. Gotta do that. A little awkward that I can't put this Geist in play yet. I get another attack in. That's okay. We have some life to spare. Oh, trample. Maybe not as much life as I was hoping. They don't have a red source yet, though. So they have to find a red source either with a fetch or take a turn off with the knight. Or I suppose they could just wolf run another creature, but that's not going to be lethal yet. So this is actually a pretty close race. Leave it on 3 and 2. Draw an Arbiter. Attack down to 8, which is not lethal, but we are threatening 10 points of flying between the Geist and our 3 attackers. So we want to basically put them on this. So if their plan is to crack a fetch land to get a red source for the wolf run, they have to shock themselves, which puts them down to 5, which means that even if they have like a Path to Exile for our Angel token, we still have 6 power worth of flying. Which I guess if they have Path, they would just Path the retreat, or the Queller to get the retreat. But basically, I'm thinking they're not killing us this turn, and then we're setting up lethal in the following turn. So hopefully they didn't draw like a Collected Company, King Company into a way to block a flyer. But if they do, then we still at least have a chump blocker in the Arbiter, because they still don't have red for the wolf run. So here we're just going to take 5, go to 5, play a tapped land, all right? So then we just violin to play the Arbiter. So that was the other play. If they're trying to crack a fetch to get a red source, we could violin the Arbiter, make them pay 2 extra to kind of throw off their game plan a little bit. So now we basically we're just gung-ho, like, all right, hopefully you don't have the company. Leave these where they are, draw land. All right, do you have it? Now this is a play that I guess leaving the Arbiter back was pretty obvious because they just block with Reflector Mage. But going for it here, where it's like, well, they're almost certainly going to block the Geist with the Reflector Mage, which means now if I attack with the Arbiter, that's going to be a lethal attacker unless they chump it with the noble or block it with the vizier. Okay, so we're probably going to kill their vizier in that situation. But then that means if they have something here, then they have lethal back with the knight. If they don't have, like, let's say, well, they have to have something here, but just what's on board here, they don't have lethal since we're at 5. If we leave a blocker back, so we block the knight and we take 4 and go to 1, and we can actually sack the selfless spirits to keep our arbiter alive if we need to. So basically, there's multiple reasons why I don't want to attack with the arbiter here, but basically just not being dead to the swing back on the board. So they could have like Queller here, and Queller could chump block the angel, because it has to chump block the angel to stay alive. They can't make any other block with it, because they're at 8, and if they try to block like a selfless spirit, they take 8. So they have to chump block the angel, and if they chump block the angel, then the arbiter can block the knight and they don't have lethal. But if we attack with knight, then they do have lethal. And they did have a Queller. So we played around Queller to make the blocks we expected them to make. So now here, kind of a decision to make. We could sack the spirit, and it's 2 less damage. So they would go to 4, but we'd have a Geist of Saint Traft. The reason that I'm pretty sure that's wrong is because then it means we lose to a fetch land, because then they're at 4, they can fetch, find the like stomping ground or either the untapped red source, whatever one it is. I think it's stomping ground, and then activate the wolf run to make their knight trample over our arbiter. But by letting the Geist die to get that extra 2 damage in from the spirit, putting them to 2 takes away the untapped stomping ground or the fetch land to find it as their outs. So now they can't find basically a red land for the Kessig. Uh, Also, not just keeping their draw steps from beating us in that spot, but they have a knight in play. So they don't have basic mountain. But if they crack, let's say they pay 2 mana, pay for arbiter, sack the forest, tap the knight, get stomping ground, tap stomping ground, and uh, the breeding pool for 2, then the noble and the other land for the activate the Kessig for 2 on reflector mage, and let's say then any land basically is an out in that spot, and so we can't we don't want to put them at 4. Like the difference between 2 life and 4 life is pretty big in this spot. So that's why we didn't sack the selfless spirit to save the Geist. And looks like they did not draw an out. So if they draw Path to Exile or Reflector Mage, they get rid of the... No, Reflector Mage doesn't work because we can vial the Arbiter back in. So it has to be Path to Exile or Collected Company into something in this spot. And even if they company into, like, I'm not sure what they're companying into, because if they company into the Reflector Mage, like I said, I could just replay the Arbiter and block. So I think they were drawing to like Path to Exile, because then like when we attack with everyone, even if they cast Collected Company and they hit like double Spell Queller, they can still only block 2 of our flyers, and the third is lethal. So I'm not really sure what they could draw other than Path to Exile on this turn. They could go off with what is it, the Vizier combo? Actually, that's the Druid, right? So they have to have the Druid, the devoted Druid on the battlefield first. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I guess if they drew Walking Ballista, they could Ballista for 3. Yeah, Ballista would work. or they could just attack with everyone, get me down to 1, and then ballista me out. So I guess Ballista and Path to Exile were basically their outs that turn. And they did not find them. Because even if they drew Reflector Mage and bounced the Queller, we could Violet back in to counter the retreat on the way back down. So yeah, that was a pretty close one. We almost mounted to come back in game 2 off the 0 land keep that almost panned out. I think we would have won if we just hit the land right away, but missing a couple turns just was too much. All right, well, I have a bonus video for you. If you're interested in watching a really good game of Limited, that's what's up next.